So, and we are live on YouTube as well, as I hope we are. Yes, this meeting has been posted. All right, wonderful. We'll, I think should be starting on the Swiss clock, quarter past 4. Welcome everybody. I'm sure there's going to be a few more people coming in as we go. But in the interest of time, since we only have 1 hour 45 minutes together, and we want to use this time wisely with our esteemed guests, I'll hand over to Kenny to introduce the series.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I'll just say a few words. So welcome also from my end to the 6th and one to last event in our public conversation series, South Designs, Planetary Futures. I'll just say a few words about the series before handing back over to my colleague, Laura, who's been leading the series. South Designs is part of a Swiss government-funded project called Governing Through Design, which supports critical and creative research on how design intervenes in everyday life worlds and planetary politics. And within this initiative, we launched a call for projects now almost 2 years ago to explore how design, thought, and practice from the South forges planetary futures. And to this initiative, over 150 teams from across the world responded, and a scientific committee helped us refine our conceptual approach and also to select the projects. 6 winning teams were awarded funding, and they've been working all this time now and are reporting on their work. And the link in the chat gives you an overview of these projects and the teams behind them. Today's conversation features 2 teams, or one team and one interlocutor. The Caribe Mutuo team will discuss their work on dialogue and collective action based on common cultural practices in the hydric territories of Ciénaga del Guajaro. I'm sorry, doing a terrible job. And I should also say that despite the fact that this is South Designs, we are doing this in English, even though our speakers would be much more comfortable, probably, and it'd make a lot more sense to speak in Spanish. So I think this illustrates, I guess, some of the challenges with the South and the North. So the Caribe Mutuo team will be in conversation today with anthropologist and writer Andrea Ballestero, whose work explores the unexpected ethical and technical entanglements through which experts understand water, and she works in Latin America. So now I'll hand over to my colleague Laura, who, as I said, has been leading this series of talks and will provide also a more detailed introduction to the speakers than I've been able to justice to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kenny. And yeah, I'm very excited that this is finally happening. I mean, as some of you might know, this is a redo. We were supposed to already meet about a month ago, and then some unfortunate, pandemic overhangs came haunting us, and we had to cancel the talk for health reasons. But I'm very happy that the Zoom room is now filled with these healthy individuals who are going to provide us with an interesting conversation, I'm sure. And I just want to give you a bit of a brief overview who we have in the room. So first of all, we have as Kenny mentioned, the Caribe Mutuo team, which is a situated collaborative research and action project. It embraces uncertainty by asking collective questions and is committed to recognizing and sharing in kind of everyday practices of culture and mutual support and care for water or watery territories. As Kenny already mentioned, it's situated in the municipality of La Peña, and there it relates to different scales, people, communities, organizations, and institutions that are part of this amphibious territory in the Colombian Caribbean. It kind of as a collaborative research and action project, it dialogues and does with those that are willing to be part of the meeting spaces they create, where they carry out activities to share experiences among different communities and kind of foster collective learning. So who is part of Caribe Mutuo? We've got 3 individuals with us today. The first one is Camila Leal Acevedo, who is interested in various trades and non-disciplinary knowledges. She studied architecture at the Pontificia Universidad Javeriana and is currently studying the history of architecture and urban planning at the Universidad Central de Venezuela. And yeah, she is interested in questions of autonomous research on power, violence, and gender in relation to architecture and territory, but also in history and criticism of architecture and also memory processes. Secondly, we have Luis Galan Garcia. Luis is an architect, urbanist, and civic designer, and he graduated from the Polytechnic Universidad of Madrid with a master's degree. He is part of the Zuluak Collective and the Zoo House platform. And Zuluak and Copia, those are the 2 kind of partners in the Caribe Mutuo outfit, so to speak. So you'll be hearing from both. And finally, also from the Copia side, we have Felipe Guerra Arjona, who describes himself as an idea thief. And he problematizes territorial coloniality and traverses questions and rehearsals on cooperativism, autonomy, anarchism, processes of desubjectivation and deprofessionalization, the socio-ecological transformation of territories, and different forms of inhabiting, forms of learning, and the political potency of repetition. So I'm very curious to hear about that. And Felipe is coming to us from Ciudad de Mexico. And finally, for our interlocutor, our esteemed guest, Andrea Ballestero. Professor Andrea Ballestero is an anthropologist interested in political and legal anthropology, science and technology studies, and social studies of finance and economics. She is a faculty member at the anthropology department at USC, California. And her work looks at the unexpected ethical and technical entanglements through which experts understand water in Latin America. And she has just recently returned from Costa Rica, where a lot of her fieldwork is based. Her first book, which many of you will probably know, A Future History of Water. We will also share the link again in the chat. It is open access and free to download. Asks how difference between a human right and a commodity is produced in regulatory and governance spaces that purport to be open to different forms of knowledge and promote flexibility and experimentation. And she has worked extensively with regulators, policymakers, and NGOs in Costa Rica and Brazil, where she traces how these techno-legal devices embody moral distinctions, pose questions about the foundations of liberal capitalist societies, and helps people inhabit non-linear and generative futures. So welcome, everybody. I'm very, very excited. Thank you for joining us. And we will go in the following order today. We will first have the Caribe Mutuo team give us a bit of an insight into what their work has been like, how their project has been developed, the geography of the project, understanding the watery and amphibious territory that we want to engage with further in these 1 hour 45 minutes. And then we'll give the floor to Andrea, who gives, based on her work, a bit of a response. And then I have prepared a few questions alongside Kenny to get the conversation going further. And in the last half an hour, we'll open for a Q&A. You are, however, more than welcome to already pop questions into the Q&A box as they come to mind, and we can also try to already integrate them into some of the responses. So yeah, you don't have to kind of wait until the last half an hour, though we might take a little bit of time to answer it as we go into our conversation. All right, yeah, without further ado, Camila, Felipe, Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laura. My compa, Luisa, is going to share the screen. I'm going to do my best to not make a lot of errors, but my English is not so in practice. So, okay. Well, firstly, we want to talk about who and what is SOPIA. SOPIA is like a wonderful collaborative relationship we have between Copia and Zuluark. We have been working since 2019 due to the COVID pandemic. So we have been getting along a lot with some projects. Together, we are focusing on developing open pedagogical models that move around autonomy and emancipation. And that's why we joined together to do Aquí hay ajolotes. That was the first project we initiated together here in Mexico. I'm in Mexico currently. And then we joined together to do Caribe Mutuo. That was a very extensive project around the Caribbean between Colombia and the islands and all these territories. But now it was focused on La Peña. I'm not going to explain a lot of that because Luisa is going to talk about it. And that's it. We have been working since then. And maybe to talk more about Copia, we are a cooperative experiment that is committed to doing by way of inhabiting and learning towards a socio-environmental transformation of the territory, as well as autonomous, anti-capitalistic, anti-patriarchal, and anti-colonial forms of being and doing. Our practice is around two things: aprender and habitar, so learning and inhabiting. And we are all the owners of the cooperative, so it's not like we have a boss or something like that. We are very autonomous in the way of work. And we are very interested in all these kind of projects that are around pedagogical knowledge and saberes. I don't know how to say that in English, but okay. We have been since 2019, and we are currently 8 associates between Bogota and Mexico. Maybe to talk more about Copia, our ethos is based on 4 principles: cooperate, repeat, redistribute, and refuse. And maybe Luisa can talk about Zuluark a little bit.
Okay, thank you, Camila. This is Zuluark. Just one little part, just one little words about our cooperative. One thing is very nice is that we meet each other from this way of being cooperatives, looking how to reinforce each other. That was the beginning of our relationship, not doing project, but like caring about what we are, a cooperative of designers. And Zuluark is defined as a practice platform for architecture and urbanism. We were founded in 2001, and it works since then in a liquid and collaborative professional model, building environments of co-responsibility where the authorship of the project is shared with as many agents as possible. And we continuously redefine ourselves through 3 key concepts. First one is rethinking and reconsidering the role of architects. Since the very, very beginning, Zuluark redefines itself and its projects every time something changes in the structure, developing what it's the most important thing for us, what we call a caring network as our main project. It's how we care to do what we do and how we do it. The second thing is building a liquid professional network in which the identity of our team merge, and it's defined principally by the identity of the projects where we collaborate. We love to melt into what we do and become what we do more than what we are. And the third one is operating through a distributed architectural platform that builds learning environments based on critical attitude and a continuous evolution of its own models. Bueno, and this is Zuloark, but wait. I'm going to start to talk a little bit after this introduction of who is this collaboration group of people. I'm going to talk a little bit very fast about the territory that we are working on. Very briefly, because it's a research action-based project, so we are also recognizing what's going on. It's not that we have all the pictures of the place. We are in Colombia, in the very north, in the Caribbean coast of Colombia, but not in the coast, but in the interior, in these wetlands and these hydric territories, where the river Magdalena ends up in the Caribbean, and specifically in El Guájaro. Kenny, you will pronounce it very well. The Guájaro swamp, or La Ciénaga del Guájaro. It's a huge ciénaga, a huge swamp made out of 3 different swamps. And specifically, we are working in a little town in the north of the ciénaga called La Peña, that you can see up there. This territory, for us, we have we define, or we conceptualize it as an amphibious territory. Everything that we have been researching and we have been thinking on, it relates the body of water with the land, and it's very interesting for us is the spaces in between. Now these ecotones, or these zones where it all melts and it becomes, sometimes it's water, sometimes is land, or it's at the same time one the latter. Now that's why we call it amphibious, because it could be on the water or on the land, or on a combination of both. And what is most interesting for us in this territory, this is a picture we took from the last time we were there in March this year. Which is more important for us is that the territory is in a state of constant transformation. It's completely changing all the time. So there's no a fixed moment, or there's not a fixed definition, or there is not a fixed way to go through the territory. And there are 3 ways of approaching, through conceptual ways of approaching the territory that we have. The first one on this transformation situation, the first one is the extreme climate conditions. As you can see, this is what it used to be, a place for a little harbor to get on the boats, that now it's like a completely different thing. This was like 1 year ago, it was in use. And then 1 year after, it's like a completely contradictory, because of the dryness of this season. The second one is the Capitaloceno, or Capitalocene, which is like completely the understanding of the territory have to do completely thing with a capitalism approach. It's impossible to understand the territory without this issue. And the third one is the territorial coloniality, no? Which is also came from a historical point of view. This territory have always been understood as a place where the coloniality have been extracting so many things, and still there's so many things that are related to that. So these are the 3 ways of approaching the territory. But now I'm going to continue. Felipe is going to continue to tell you about the 3 ways of understanding the project or developing our research project. Felipe.
Gracias, Camila and Luiso. I have a bit of a sore throat, so bear with me. I'll do my best. I'll take my time. I have water. So I wanted to start with culture, and as Laura mentioned, there's 3 axes in the project, so we're gonna try to move through those 3 and share with you. So Caribe Mutuo's main horizon is to rehearse in as many ways as possible, and that's how we have been co-moving uncertainty through rehearsals, on situated learning and study moments that acknowledge, share, and strengthen processes of re-existence. So how do we exist and resist at the same time, and how we do it together. And we do that through 3 main axes of communal and autonomous experiences, which are culture, mutual aid, and territorial care. And what we mean by communal and autonomous experiences are practices for sustaining life, both symbolically and materially, by the communities of La Peña, sometimes against and sometimes in spite of the state, and in spite of political and economic power. There's lots of forces in La Ciénaga, El Guájaro, now and historically, as Luiso mentioned. Next, please, Luiso. So although the project has been working through these 3 axes of culture, mutual aid, and territorial care, it's very important to acknowledge also that the experiences sustained by the communities of La Peña show the inseparability of the 3 axes. No? Even though we're trying to move through those 3, they're always present, and they kind of entangle the 3 axes. And it's a way to reproduce communal and singular life in La Peña through everyday cultural practices, no? Such as cooking, fishing, agriculture, dance, music, and how all these experiences sustain common modalities of re-existence. So our collective effort since 2022 has been to rehearse in diverse modes of sharing culture through everyday activities, especially through transgenerational dialogue. So we have been moving together with the community of La Peña, with the youngest one and the oldest ones. And especially through this transgenerational dialogue and outside institutional frames, and in as much as a horizontalizing modality of learning that we can approach and we can rehearse. Next, Luiso. And next. The next axis of the project is mutual aid or solidarity. So how can we take each other and sustain each other? And mutual aid are integral also to everyday life and the sustainment of the communities, from labor unions, fishermen cooperatives, housing unions, artisan collectives, to the everyday practice of crianza mutua, which is the mutual care of children by the community. So children are moving around houses, and especially women take care of the children, even though they're not their own children, but they're in the community through the crianza mutua. And we have been commuting mutual aid, especially by way of food, particularly through cooking, recipes that spring from festive and collective moments, such as the tamal and the sancocho. I would love to translate tamal and sancocho, but it's impossible. We need to eat a tamal and drink a sancocho in order to translate the experience through your tongue. So then food becomes both an excuse to gather and assemble and learn from and with each other, but also a moment to talk about how the territory is being taken care through diverse local ingredients, such as hibiscus, yuca, guineo plantain, auyama squash, or even the lack of ingredients such as fish, that we can talk a bit more on that later. You saw already the images of the drought that Luiso showed, that there's a lack of fish in El Guájaro. So again, our collective effort through mutual aid is to kind of co-move experiences through collective memory of these transgenerational dialogues outside institutional frames. And I'll pass the word to Camila.
Gracias. Also, just to explain why we use this kind of questions is because we like to approach every topic with a question, not only for the project, but for us, for the people who is there, and like a provocation for a conversation. So in this case, who has the most power to transform water, or who do we inhabit, understand the territory, is like a question to problematize all the diverse interactions we have been seeing in El Guájaro. First, the history of La Ciénaga has been marked by a long-term colonial process, such as the Dique Canal, and then the construction of the swamp that is artificial. So it's like all the Ciénaga was built like an artificial production of the territory, and now has been changing very fast due to the contamination, the extractivism, other practices that are more like massive compared to the original and traditional ways of inhabiting this territory. And also there's a lot of control over the territory by different institutions, organizations, people. And so this means that there are a lot of power relations over the territory that lead to a very vast transformation in the use, and there's a lot of violence and, well, extractivism. And this is not only the cause, but also the main problem between the extreme changes of the climate and the land tenure. So after we do the first trip, it was very, very hard to see all the difficulties these people has been suffering because of all the conditions and climate extreme events that are happening. And I placed this quote about sembrando hambre, sowing hunger, that we heard from one of the local fishermen, I think. And he was talking about that they have a lot of water, but they don't have the access to food because of all the problems between of the use of the water, of the politics they are building from the state. So there's a lot of things happening in the territory, and we want to see and problematize all the power that is being held here. And after that, we want to finish with an open question about what can we do together. And maybe this question is not only for us and for the project, but also to initiate a conversation here. And this is the main question we have in Caribe Mutuo all the time. What can we do? What can we offer as a collective, but also as an individual, each one of us? And this is it. Thank you so much. Maybe.
Wonderful. Thank you, Camila. It's been a lovely overview, and I'm always so amazed at how you're holding the different kind of scales together, and we'll be getting into some of the questions of how that what this has to do also with your design practice, etc. But I want to give the word now to Andrea to respond a little bit, and also again, apologies from my side that we have to do this in English. I really appreciate everybody's effort. If we were a few years down the line, we would probably have auto-translate, but maybe that would bring us further away from each other than together. So that's actually, I guess it's nice the way it is. So Andrea, without further ado, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Muchísimas gracias, Laura, Camila. Luis, Felipe, es un gusto estar con ustedes. Kenny, hi again. Nice to meet you this way. Voy a hacer un poquito de español y un poquito de inglés. Vamos a bailar un poquito con los idiomas. Pero quizá building on the conversation that we had, the preparatory conversation, I thought that rather me comment on what you are doing, I really took to heart what we discussed about this process of unlearning and inhabiting together a space for thinking. And so what I thought I would do is share some of my ongoing work on the Caribbean as well, el Caribe de Costa Rica, en la provincia de Limón, to just put it side by side and do this exercise of lateral thinking between the two projects. And then I also have questions about the really interesting work that you're doing, so we can get to those. And I'm just going to share my screen, and if you could let me know that you see the actual slides. Yes, okay. So as Laura mentioned, my name is Andrea Ballestero. I'm an anthropologist. I am from Costa Rica, but I work in the United States. And I've been thinking with and through water for a while now. And with many of the people in the Zoom room, I actually saw a couple of familiar names. So hello to friends that I haven't seen in a while, or people whose work I really admire, many of them from Colombia, that are there joining us. So this project that I'm working on now builds on my previous work on water, but actually it grows out of those moments when the world asks you and demands that you do something different. And for me, that's something different, something that I hadn't anticipated through my reading and learning and talking to people, was orienting myself downwards. I had been doing work with water, but on a horizontal plane, if you will, over the surface. And now I find myself joining forces, which is the way I've been thinking about this project, deciphering aquifers and stretching the imagination downwards. So for me, this grows out of a push that I got from my collaborators in Costa Rica, people that work in state agencies and communities on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, and organizations that are highly technical on the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica, community organizations, that invited me to go from this. What you have here is the inherited French geological imaginary of what geology is, a series of strata that are basically fixed, that you can just understand when you've had access to deep time, if you will. In the everyday, you're supposed to not really know very much or sense very much about what's happening down there. It's supposed to be static. It is not. We'll get to that in a moment. And pushing me to go into a different way of understanding subterranean worlds that included movement, that included the notion of repetition in time that colleagues had been talking about, and that, of course, put the question of coloniality, power, asymmetries, and capitalism at the core. But at the same time, en este momento en que nos encontramos, pues el espacio subterráneo es una dimensión planetaria al mismo tiempo. Esta es una noticia del New York Times, donde este diario, ubicado en Estados Unidos, en el centro capitalista e imperial que significa Estados Unidos en el presente, nos dice que because of the amount of water that has been drawn from aquifers, el agua que ha sido extraída, the axis of the Earth is changing. So if we think about planetarity, not only as a metaphor, but as a geophysical question, then what is happening under the surface, in addition to the story of oil and mining, the extractivist story that we know, has it's really transforming not only our imagination, but our geophysical presence. In Costa Rica, this was translated into a project to organize the extraction of water, of underground water, and organized from the point of view of the state, which means map it and have a better controller and understanding of it. Now, in my work before, I have been thinking about water, but one thing that the place where I ended, is the right way to put it, was a place that was not where I anticipated to start. And this was because of, again, the push of the communities and collaborators that had been working with. I thought I would start and continue working with particular bodies of water. And what I found was that people were really pushing me and asking me about things that they didn't have as much knowledge about. So my collaborators in these communities knew about water bodies, lived with, reacted to, suffered the violent consequences of water movement. But they were really curious about things that happened elsewhere. And those ended up being the regulatory and legal spaces that I ended up studying. And so the movement for me was to think not only about pipes, dams, rivers, or oceans, or these things that very materially remind us of water, but to also think about something that I ended up calling devices. In my case, techno-legal devices. Very briefly, these devices are technical products in my case. They are a water pricing formula, a list in a legal taxonomy, a pact that is produced between people that want to care for water and, a couple other. But what is important about the device as something to think and act with is that I, for me at least, I see it as a node of temporalities. And what that means is something concrete that ties very different temporal registers. Things that happened throughout the year because of changes in pattern in rain, with things that have been inherited from colonial histories of knowledge production and legal institutions. They also combine diverse technical inheritance. And here the technical, for me, it's really important to emphasize, it's not only the techno-scientific. Technical knowledge includes the technical skills and inheritances of people in the communities. And some of the images that you showed, for instance, in a certain way, in addition to the sensorial richness of the tamal is also a technical inheritance, because you can very easily mess up a tamal, having made tamales myself at home during Christmas, right? So to really remind us that these are also technical accomplishments that are in the rich cultural inheritance of the different communities that we work with. It's also a space for improvisation, and I here very much want to emphasize what Camila said about repetition as one of the principles of the work of producing change in the world. And that repetition includes things that we know work, doing them again, but also improvising in new ways to open up the spaces that in your write-up you mentioned, the spaces of uncertainty, drawing on Denise Ferreira da Silva's work and so on. But for me, also devices are very concrete. So they allow us to take these big questions about planetarity, about justice, about amphibiousness, and locate them in a very concrete, empirical, and for me as an anthropologist, ethnographic context. But if we think about human beings, life context, like the very concrete conditions of life. So with that, what I've been doing is taking the notion of the device and thinking with Sylvia Winter's work, and guiding myself, or letting myself be guided by Sylvia Winter's notion of a deciphering practice. And again, here, this resonates very nicely with where we ended with Camila, where the point is not necessarily to ask what meaning is. What do things mean for people? This is particularly in anthropology, this was the old anthropological take, right? You go and you figure out what usually an indigenous community, what the meanings are in relation to X or Y. And that led to a very extractive form of knowledge production. So here, what I'm trying to do is to ask with my collaborators in the field, not only what meaning is, although you go through that, but the point is not to chart meaning, but to figure out what meaning does in the world and for whom. What are its consequences of the fact that we understand and shape worlds in one way and not another. So this is Costa Rica. If you continue to the right, you would get to Colombia, but I had to magnify the map. Oh, I didn't do this map because our country is so small, and so it didn't fit to show it all. This is a map of potential aquifers that potentially exist in the subsurface in Costa Rica, and a map that also shows the movement of the tectonic plates in our country. So when I hear many people talk about, how in the Anthropocene we're rediscovering there is an underground or there's a geological substrate that shapes life, that is a surprise. My surprise is that they say that is a surprise, right? Because coming from a country that is constantly shaking, constantly moving, we constantly get ash from volcanoes. This narrow understanding of the geological has always been lively and has always been shaping worlds. And this is not evidently distinctive to Costa Rica. The majority of, I don't know if the majority, but a large quantity of places around the world are subject to these geological forces constantly shaping everyday life. This is zooming into the Caribbean coast. This is the city of Limon, where I was born. And this is APM Terminals, which is a big megaport that was built a few years ago that signified big shift in how the state understands itself and how it outsources to foreign companies its assets. And this area that I have here is the area that sits on top of the Rio Blanco aquifer, which is where I'm doing my work at the moment. And I'm at 10 minutes, so I'll try to go quickly. This is some of the community members that I work with. They are located in that area, and they are an association that manages water for these local populations. They're also really and their water comes from the Rio Blanco aquifer. There's also, they also have grown in the past 10 years. So they went from being a very small organization that served local residents to an organization that now serves all of that area. Let me go back. All of that area here. So all of these in here. So I mentioned this because community organizations sometimes grow and they become responsible for a number of things happening in their territory. And so to me, it's really interesting to see what happens when their area of influence and their possibilities of acting according to distinct ethical principles grows spatially and in terms of the number of people that they are servicing. And this is part of what's happening here. In other words, community organizations are not always very small. Sometimes they grow. And what happens when that happens? What happens when that happens? Yeah. This is an aerial view of Rio Blanco. And this is one of the many events. This was in 2022, so we're still height of the pandemic. And this was a demonstration that a state official was making about how aquifers work. And this is another example of the kinds of mobilizations that these organizations are involved in. This picture is from the Pacific coast of Costa Rica, but I just wanted to put it there to show that it's not only that kind of technical work, but this kind of political mobilization and demonstration of dissatisfaction, the one that they are engaged in. So this is the model that I've been thinking with that has become really important for the work that these communities do. It was originally brought by the state functionary who became an ally of this organization. They did amazing projects together. Now this person has been banned from working on this project because we had a change in our president, and now how to describe what's going on. I guess I'll just say we have our own version of the Bolsonaro, Trump, Orban model taking place in Costa Rica at the moment. So this person that was an ally actually now is not working in this project. And so there's something that I want to say in terms of who those unusual allies are. Caribe Mutuo describes as one of their principles, working with unusual allies. And so thinking about who those unusual allies might be and how can we foster those relations. And also with devices that are physical. This is a well. This is a monitoring well. I always like to show this image because it's such a humble image. And when we think about wells, we usually think about bigger things. So the well is also a device that we can use to think about all of these transformations. And this is just a map of all of the registered wells in Costa Rica. And so we were here, right? And so if we think about the well as a device that is shaping how these community organizations work, is shaping how the state acts, and is shaping the planetary, if we think about the axis of the Earth changing, you see this little thing that is supposed to be very specific, local, gives you the opportunity to do in all of these scalar, to travel in a scalar way, but also to ask questions that cross dimensions, from the material to the historical, to the technological, to the care relations, and so on and so forth. And so this is another image of another organization, another meeting that we had. And as you see, it's usually not a lot of people that participate in these meetings. And this is something that we can talk about the distinction between planning and organizing collective spaces versus collective workshops, talleres, reuniones that have a more conversational and more of a let me tell you what I think component. And I think for me here, what I always try to do is to not presume that there's a moral charge to each of those. I like to be agnostic about the form itself and see what it does in a particular situation, because sometimes having fewer people can be much more impactful for that radical transformation. And sometimes you need to have a lot of people. So not always presuming that we know in advance what is it that is going to yield the kind of transformation that we are looking for. And so I'll end here. I guess what I'll say is that the way I'm thinking about these issues now is, how is it that we can join forces with particular devices? I'm interested in the technical and in this world, so technical, to open up the worlds that we want to see come into being, rather than reproduce the colonial, capitalist, patriarchal worlds that we have inherited so far. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Gracias. Yeah, I love the fact that we can juxtaposition these two projects that are also so geographically proximate, and I think it's many kind of similar questions, and maybe to kick us off, and maybe the Caribe Mutuo team, this is first a bit of a question for you to give us a bit more detail based on what Andrea has shared about kind of devices and the technical. I would be quite interested in, if you've kind of shown the community layer and who you've engaged with, and who else are these unusual allies that you've come into contact with in La Peña, and also thinking through the notion of infrastructure, right? And infrastructuring around the swamp. Can you give us a bit more insight kind of about the lay of the land, how water is managed, access is managed? Obviously, there's a lot of negotiation around that you touched upon around fishing, but just to give us also some texture on the technical encounters that you might have had in this kind of relearning and unlearning with other allies. Yes, Andrea, do you want to add a question to that? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you. There's a helicopter. I hope you can hear it now. I actually was really taken by the notion of cuaderno abierto and thinking about a cuaderno abierto as one of these technical devices that, of course, is a lot more than just technical device, but just as an example of one of these very concrete things that can do this work.
And maybe just to say that Camila had a very urgent appointment, so she excused herself early, but Felipe and Luis will, field all of our question and the conversation. So yeah, I don't know who of you wants to start.
Felipe, come on.
Bueno, primero, gracias, Andrea, por tu presentación. Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Maybe start by going to a historical note. Camila already mentioned something about the Canal del Dique, and Luis also. But I think it's very important also to remember and understand what El Guájaro technically means in the long history of coloniality. Because the Canal del Dique, which Camila briefly mentioned, was a canal that was built by the Spanish during El Virreinato de Nueva Granada in order to connect the biggest river in Colombia, which is the Magdalena, to Cartagena, which was the biggest slave port. So they used an already existing indigenous network of canals, and they did another one, which is a bigger one, which is the Canal del Dique. And then in the 70s, they decided to flood an entire region, which is the Guájaro. It was, before that, there were 5 different swamps, and they flooded the entire region, and that's how La Ciénaga de la Peña was built. And it has only 2 doors for the Canal del Dique. So there's a lot of forces in this single device, in this single port. And in the 70s, it was built, and then suddenly the communities around La Peña had a lot of fish. So I think it's interesting to think about both. So water, coloniality, displacement of communities, and then a sudden fish rush, which they don't longer have. So they for many decades they had a lot of fish, and they sustained the communities through fishing. They opened the gates of the Canal del Dique every now and then, and they will have fish coming in. They were also able to breed their own fish. And then in the 2000s, some economic powers from Barranquilla, which is the biggest city close to La Peña, capital of Atlántico, the state, they started having camaroneras, so those places where you breed shrimps. And they were able to push via their economic power a public policy that made the communities unable to breed their own fish now. So they're not able to breed any more their fish. They are unable to open the gates, so there's no fish incoming, and the water of the reservoir or of the swamp is only used now by these big companies who are no longer breeding shrimps, but they are now breeding the fish that the local fishermen used to fish decades ago. So now they have the complete monopoly of the fish market in La Peña. So I think it's important to like understand the different technical devices, also in terms of fishing, because now they are like the local practices of fishing, which with la atarraya, no idea how to translate that. It's this beautiful net that they that they fish with, and now they're using transmayo, which is like this giant mallas, metal devices, and they drag the devices in the swamp, and then they get everything they can. But it's I think that's an interesting case of how different powers are colliding, and then how a sudden rush of resources, in this case fish, then becomes also a contradictory device against the community, because they for decades that's what they knew what to do. And before that, they were also fishing, but they were fishing via the swamps, and they even went fishing to the ocean, which is 4 or 5 hours, or they will go and migrate, and they will live for 3 months in a different lake, and they will move around. But they were suddenly conditioned also to have fish right next to them, and then taken again. So yeah, I think that note is important. Maybe Luiso, you can also comment.
No. Just one little thing. Another device to add to this complexity that you haven't mentioned is the doors of this swamp. This water of body have doors of water that connects the body of water with the Canal del Dique, which is a way to balance the level of the water and what it comes in and out, not only in terms of water, but also in terms of fish breathing, little fishes in the period of reproduction, and all these things coming. Or when they're floated, it's also a way to level the water of the ciénaga, to put some of that water that can go to the ocean through this channel. But this thing that is supposed to be used as an equilibrium of these ecosystems and these different forces, it works in the opposite way. So it's controlled by mafias and also by corrupt governments, that what they do is there is a community that controls the doors. So it open it or close it or leave it open when it's supposed to be closed in their own benefits. So the people close to the gate are the one controlling, because when you're close to the gate, you have access to some of the fish coming into from the canal in the different periods. And we were there in a moment that it was so that you can understand the absurdity of this thing. In the sometime, when was that? Like 3 years ago, there was like a huge floated, and they couldn't open the doors, because if they open the doors, the fishermen close to the gates, they wouldn't get as much fish. So between the communities surrounding the ciénaga, there are completely different interests, forces, and like approaches to the territory and to community caring and community living and stuff like that, which is interesting, because it was the very beginning of our approach to ciénaga. It's like to connect or to establish some connections through the water between the different communities that we understand when we visit, that they were kind of like very in a completely different approach. There were not any relationship between them. We start to understand that, and we said, why don't we establish any like what we call a floating device that could connect things, no, and connect synergies and stuff like that. And then we realized it was not possible. They didn't want it even to connect. They have different approaches based on the same exactly thing. So a big problem for someone was like an opportunity for another one. So how can you approach? And there were communities like, I don't know, 15 minutes away from one from the other. No, so it's kind of this complex situation, and very interesting also that would make us focus in one of the communities, because thinking in the relationship between many of them, it was like too difficult to understand the territory from them. Just to this little comment to add to what Felipe was saying. This has been done when they did the big swamp. Out of the 5 small ones, they established these doors. They connected to the channel, thinking that it could be a way to re-equilibrate the territory, but it became another another device to establish and to enforce the power that you have within the territory and the resources of the territory. And also the culture of the place, which is fishing. It's all about fish. It's all about, that's the knowledge, that's the culture. The festival, the main festival they have over there is Festival de la Mojarra, which is one type of fish. And just to finish, sorry, one thing that Felipe mentioned, that when these big companies establish fishing, not fishing, but growing fish companies establish, they put a regulation of who can put fish inside, like little fishes to breed fish inside, but to a specific type of fish, a specific type of fish, so that to their interest. So like no one can put mojarra inside because it's the big fish that I want to grow. So it's not only to like no one can breed fishes, but no one can breed what I want to breed in my big companies that also hiring most of the fishermen to go in these companies. No, it's like I don't know, a complex, very complex, fluid situation.
And that, I think that is super fascinating what you're sharing about the way in which these, technical devices are obviously kind of used to control, but also kind of within communities to kind of sow divisions. And I think, Andrea, what you touched upon as well is like community organizations, how they grow, but also how they take on different technical duties that are not only technical duties, right? But they are also, laden with power and responsibility at the same time. And this learning and this kind of knowledge that gets accumulated is also kind of sowing new divisions in this. What we consider as neutral and technical is neither only technical or neutral, right? What I also wanted to touch on, and I think this question of scale came up a few times now, and with the with the title of this series also having the planetary in its title. Andrea, was very intrigued by your notion of casual planetarity, which I think you also spelled out in that article where you're thinking around or with that aquifer model. And I was wondering, this kind of casual planetarity as a shared praxis. For me, hearing the Caribe Mutuo team talk, there's a lot of this, casual planetarity in there, and these encounters, with planetary crisis and 1.5 degree world, etc. But the very minute details of thinking across the scale. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, and maybe also specify a little bit more about this notion of casual planetarity that I think is really productive to think with.
Thank you, Laura. I think that that notion helps me with something that, as a person that is from Costa Rica, which is if we can think about it, one of those places that are usually looked at from the global north, quote, 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 whatever that category means, right? But one of those places that are studied as examples of interesting alternative things. And of course, I'm saying Costa Rica, that's just one label for a huge variety of experiences and people and things, but allow me the simplification for the sake of conversation. There's almost, I feel like, a desire to turn the local, the ethnographic in my case, the global South example, to turn it into a salvational object, right? To convert it into something that is giving us the way out of a planetary crisis that is being recognized by the global north as a site of something special with a kind of mystique that gives us something that you can't find elsewhere. And that has bothered me, because all places or groups of people are full of everything, of joy, beauty, solidarity, love, and violence, and exclusion, and etc. Right? So there's a certain coloniality in the romanticization of certain groups of people and areas around the world. Now, from that, I got to this question of the planetary as the new metaphor that is, or scale, if you will, or label, that is creating convergence around preoccupations related to climate change, environment, racism, coloniality, so on and so forth. But my problem was that the people that I work with, I have never heard use the word planetarity, right? And they don't use the word Anthropocene either. And they don't speak about in these terms. And I work with a group of people that have been involved in environmental questions for over 30 years. So it's not because they just don't know, right? And so what do you do with that? How is it that you remain open to the world, in the sense that how do you take that and let it shape and change how you think about things? And so for me, was this notion, one way to do that, one experiment to do that, was this notion of casual planetarity. So what that is the planetary not as this charismatic category that now will give us the way out of our problems. It was the Anthropocene. Well, the Anthropocene is not so much anymore. And, even like scientific terms, because of the politics of how these things are adopted, it also is vanishing. It's now maybe something that can bring earth scientists and social scientists and humanists into conversation. That's another argument for the Anthropocene, etc. Right? But so all of these categories, they emerge, and then all of a sudden they're deflated because, of course, they have limits. All categories have limits. And so when I talk to my collaborators, when I learn from their work, when I try to be part of their conversations, what I realized is that they're doing this very serious, engaged work, but they don't move from there to mystifying that work. They don't move from there to objectify their categories, to say, okay, this is the solution to our problems. They are engaged in this casual, everyday way of dealing with these questions that are, this casual way is combined with, okay, how do I do this and at the same time have 3 hours to go stand in line because I need to complete this, get this paperwork done in the city that's 20 minutes away, right? And I'm saving the world at the same time, right? Or I'm saving aquifers in San Jose. How is it that those two things coexist? And that's a notion of casualness. That, for me, the way in which thinking about geological being as a condition that we all share asymmetrically, and at the same time figuring out how to do this in the midst of the casual, everyday competing obligations that push you to be contradictory, to want to, of course, protect aquifers, keep the forest standing where it is, but at the same time, you have your friend that lives 3 hours from you, who is actually selling, trees for wood, right? And that is also part of this force field, which is something that I've been thinking about, that people are conduct their lives in, and they conduct their lives in to deal with the immediate pressures of having your kid go to school, having enough money to get to the end of the month, go do that thing that you need to do in the city that will take your whole day, and at the same time thinking about climate change, biodiversity conservation, how to get the water to the 8,000 people that depend on your organization now. All of these things are meshed up in this casual form of engaging with your obligations and responsibilities. That for me is a little bit of a contrast with the big P planetarity that becomes objectified into this mystical way out of our problem. And I'm using mystical here in a little bit of a critical, playful way. So that's where I got to that. And the example in the paper is this model, how this model that is supposed to give you a sense of geological presence is actually this everyday thing that happens in this community organization when a state representative comes to show how the model works. I hope that speaks to what you had in mind.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. I think that really captured, I mean, I love how you call the planetary a charismatic category. I'm totally going to steal that. That's very great, because it does conjure up this kind of mythical way. It's actually a lot more mundane, right? A lot more mundane, engaging, and having to engage, being forced to engage with these these everyday extremes, right? The hunger and the lack of fish. I mean, Luisa and Felipe, what you described as well, right? It's this constant encounter with the planetary and with planetary crisis.
Can I add something, Laura?
Absolutely,
yeah. Just
please,
one thing, because my example is about this community organization, but this casualness also applies to the negotiators of goals for carbon reduction. So I don't want to only ascribe that to the community. That this casualness is about the everyday practice of everybody that's involved in trying to figure out this.
And that's a great reminder, right? We are all, kind of stuck in this in a way. And I mean, from Felipe and Luisa, what then for me begs the question also around this casual, everyday force field. Back to your question of, kind of what can we do together, right? How do people act together, because we're all stuck in this everyday casualism. There's an individualization around this, but then there's also the communal, which you guys are emphasizing so strongly. And I was wondering if you can also share a bit about preliminary responses you found to this question of, well, what can you do together, and then also maybe segue around, what does that have to do with design? I mean, you are designers, architects, right? How does that link up to design as a practice, right?
That's an incredible question. Thank you for that. So maybe also another historical note, especially from Copia, because when we started in 2019, we made an open call to gather and think and assemble an architecture cooperative. And that was the initial intention, to gather around a discipline and a profession. And that crashed violently, and that was beautiful to see it crash, because many of the people that answered the open call didn't come from architecture, and then suddenly the discipline and the profession was not like the amalgam of the group, but it was those two questions that Camila shared at the beginning, learning and inhabiting, outside a disciplinary and professional frame. So then design becomes a completely different notion when you think about design, not in terms of the certainties of a professional frame and how are we modulated through the universities, because all professions are a way in which we're subjected and modulated to have certainties, professional certainties, which are always top-down certainties, in which we know the solutions for the problems that we ourselves create, because we're professionals are experts in creating their own problems rather than the solutions. So then this design became, I think for us, an interesting question and how to move together. I think something that we have been also thinking through for the last months has been the opposition or the difference between promotion and commotion. So professional thinking and a disciplinary design thinking tries to promote solutions. And in promoting, you're always thinking either people are not moving or people are moving in the wrong direction. So we're trying to, rather than promote certain topics or theories or methods, conmove. So move with people, and so in Spanish it's beautiful because conmover, and conmover is with your stomach, with your tongue, with your bailando, cantando. So it's a different. So how we move together with all our bodies, and in that sense, what we have been trying to do in Caribe Mutuo has been to kind of dissolve and ourselves within the community and move with the community rather than for the community, and that has a very different pace. So it's a different rhythm. The initial complicities that have spring from those rehearsals have been beautiful, especially with the oldest ones and with the youngest ones, because those are also the people in the community that have more time, no? So then the youngest ones are in school, but they suddenly have a lot of time after school. The oldest ones are not working anymore. So then those initial complicities have been woven by rehearsing and by meeting with each other and by co-moving, rather than having certainty of, okay, we're gonna work with the leaders, communal leaders and the boards and this organization and the unions, because they do have a lot of potency, but we're, as you said at the beginning, we're trying also to kind of rehearse what uncertainty and unlearning means, and that kind of moves in between of maybe not in between, but traverses the question of professionalization and I just forgot, and promotion, no? And just to go back to the other question that we didn't answer about Cuaderno Abierto that Andrea asked, now we're thinking through a device that we're calling temporarily La Caja Mutua, so like the mutual box. So thinking of a huge toolbox, no? Like a communal toolbox that we are with the community building, and it's full of now it's full of fanzines, recordings, photos, no? So that how can we share all that has been shared within the workshops and within the moments of assembly, and then how can the community itself use that toolbox after let's say this first stage of Caribe Mutuo comes to an end with let's say South Designs, but Caribe Mutuo is a project and will be a project that will continue after that, no? So then how can we build also that toolbox together? And that has been also beautiful because now we're working, so our main accomplices are 5 girls from La Peña. They are in the last year of high school, and they are now our territorial link. And that has been beautiful to see them and accompany them and also learn from them and with them to continue the work while we're not there. Because I think that's also very important to acknowledge. Then how can we move together if we're not inhabiting the same territory? So what does that imply? If we move together every now and then, and we're not constantly moving together as the community moves. And these 5 girls have been incredible help and learning experience. Result.
Maybe jump in, just also building on what Andrea was saying about this danger of romanticizing. I was going back to one of the things that Maria Camila was saying at the beginning of the talk about saberes as untranslatable, but I guess something like knowledges, and distinct from conocer as a more, I don't know, formal way of knowing perhaps. And I was wondering how you conceive of, an environmental knowledge in regards to this kind of tension between a learning while dancing or something you mentioned also, versus professional science or professional design, right? I think it kind of for me goes back to that question of Andrea's of where you think it cross rather than assigning more value to one way of knowing over another. I don't know if that makes sense at all. Also, because you were saying previously, amphibious territories are in constant transformation, so that also poses challenges of knowing. Coloniality, of course, is all around us in that sense, as a kind of epistemic fixing in the interest of power. So it's probably tempting then to think of saber or knowing in this other way as somehow a salvation for the techniques of capitalist globalization, but I assume, at least Andrea, you will find that opposition problematic, right? So I wonder how we can think about environmental knowledge across or beyond this binary.
By environmental knowledge, what do you mean? Kenny, do you mean like knowledge that communities hold, or you're thinking about
learning about the environment, learning about an environment that constantly changes, that is an embodied practice, but also one that of course relies on the colonial library or the colonial archive.
Yeah. I can begin with a couple of things on the table and then pass it on to think more in a more exciting way with the specifics of La Peña. So I how to say this? I think that if we think from the concreteness of the world that we are part of, that hierarchy of knowledges is inescapable. So I think about, there is a hierarchy that is based on the historical processes that you mentioned that is in place. So rather than thinking about knowledges in a non-hierarchical way, what I think is that those hierarchies might change and are dynamic. And maybe it isn't always that what we identify as colonial capitalism-centered knowledge is always what comes ahead. So in other words, one way to weaken or loosen the hold of colonial capitalist knowledge, whatever that is, I mean, those are very big categories, but just for the sake of conversation, is to not automatically cede power to it as a taken for granted fact. Because when you go and look at the empirics of how the world works, there is a way that knowledge that we could say is less capitalist oriented, although who knows, right? That's an empirical question, that is held by, let's say, actors that are not at the center of state-led power, at some points can be the actual key to get things done. And so what I'm trying to say is that the way I think about it is building on what has been said already, is what the key might be in loosening our thinking to be more open to the dynamics and changing hierarchies at a more micro scale, and to use what happens in those settings as a door to try to transform bigger structures. I don't know so much about that specific case, but let's say the question about opening the doors or not of the dam, right? There's a way in which centralized knowledge is too slow and too out of date to really know about what you might do about that. And there's a way in which local residents can have a much more nuanced, dynamic understanding of those challenges. And so how is it that we might try to turn around things so that it is that knowledge, the one that comes to the fore at particular moments as it's needed, as an approach to thinking about how to turn around or upside down the hierarchies of knowledge that we exist in. And again, I'm reflecting on what I see. I'm not saying normatively that I think that a particular knowledge should always be on top. I'm not saying that. Although I believe in science, right? And I think that science, Western with all colonial history, is also helpful at particular moments, right? So I guess that's my reaction. Rather than say this is a contrast that we can always anticipate, say, how might we empirically chart the dynamics of these hierarchies to find the points of intervention when we might turn upside down certain things, and to refuse, and this is a feminist orientation, to refuse the claim that centralized knowledge makes that they are the knowledge, or that is the knowledge that counts and that is always on top. I would go, let me see empirically if you're really always on top. And maybe you're not always on top. But we just used to giving the stage, so to speak, to that tradition of knowledge production and reinforce its ideological dominance in the process. That was a very convoluted way of speaking. I hope something I was able to convey something clearly.
Felipe, you can jump right in. And I just wanted to send a quick reminder, if anybody has other questions, to pop into the Q&A box. We have got one from Alejandro, which I think partly was answered, but maybe you can get into that as well, Felipe. But yeah, go, take it away.
Yeah, I can comment on what Kenny asked, and then also to Alejandro. To start with Kenny's question, I think we can share an experience on our last visit to La Peña, and again, how to embrace uncertainty and how to embrace undisciplinary uncertainty. So how can we, not even interdisciplinary, but undisciplinary uncertainty? So on our last visit, we were the only certainty was that we were going to be there for 15 days and that we wanted to move certain moments of assembly around the three axes: culture, mutual aid, and territorial care. And then this is important because we haven't mentioned at the beginning of our relation and accomplished with Caribe, Mutuo, and La Peña, we started working with MUPAPA, which is Museo Paleontológico de La Peña, which is a communal paleontological museum managed by two school teachers, or a couple, Marta and Luis. And they were initially our link with the territory and the community. And on the first day of our visit, we arrived, plane, 2 buses, 42 degrees, we were melting, and Marta was already expecting us with 15 students, and she said, okay, now you're gonna do an environmental diagnosis of the Ciénaga del Guájaro. And I was like, what? First of all, we don't do environmental diagnosis, and second of all, we're just landing, and there's no way we're gonna do this. And then it was beautiful because that, so she comes from a technical institution. The high school in La Peña is a technical institution, which is also beautiful because it's based in agriculture and fishing. So the last 2 or 3 years, they are they learn about the basics of agriculture and fishing, and they have actually also the places to rehearse in the school. But then the meeting with this initial meeting with Marta and the 15 students became like a walk through La Ciénaga. We ended up walking for like 2 hours and sharing what we were gonna do, their expectations. And then suddenly they told us that they were gonna work with hibiscus, Flor de Jamaica, for the whole year. And they were supposed, because there's a lot of hibiscus in the territory, but they don't actually use it or consume it. They don't do water or tea, anything. And Marta was really interested on making this kids work with hibiscus and like pushing them to first of all get to know what hibiscus is and how to grow hibiscus, but then how to transform hibiscus. And it was a beautiful coincidence because we ourselves had been making tamales, hibiscus tamales in Mexico for 2 years. So we told them, okay, great, our next activity, which was the first activity around culture. How do we understand culture, but also how do we practice culture? What is culture in practice, and how do we sustain life collectively? And ended up being a session of cooking tamales with the 15 students. And it was also beautiful because probably 2/3 of the students already knew how to make tamales. So we just ended up sharing how to prepare the hibiscus, the Flor de Jamaica, con un guisado. And then all the questions around culture and around the tamal started like moving through the students and with the students. So I think that's a beautiful example of how different saberes, so different knowledges, are shared and are also moved communally, and they are part of the everyday practice of the community. And for Alejandro's question, well, I think that's exactly the question that we are trying to problematize. No? So there is no specific design work. If we think of design work as a disciplinary outcome in terms of architecture, no, or in terms of industrial design, there's no building, there is no design in terms of drawing. Where especially from Copia, we're not interested in architecture as a disciplinary or professional practice. We're interested in producing plays and co-producing and co-moving plays. So there's no specific design work in that sense. There is a putting together certain moments to share the 3 axes. And what will happen with those 3 axes, mutual aid, culture, and territorial care, will be kind of decided in our next visit and through the years. And I think that will change also in the coming years and in the coming months. So the only outcome that we can share is the caja mutua for now. So there's this caja, the toolbox that will be kind of collecting what we have learned together, and how will that be shared will be decided by the community. But there's no outcome in terms of a professional design work.
Great, thank you, Felipe. And I think there's a lot in there around unlearning, around defamiliarization, right, and these kind of concepts. I am now also curious to if you could elaborate a little bit more. So you said a lot about the access of culture and mutual aid, but how did you activate territorial care? Because I do think that that's another really important access, and maybe also to connect to Andrea, to your work, and also, you know, how you intersect in your work with the aquifers with notions of care and maybe even repair.
So that has been one of the most challenging questions for us in the community, because there, as we said in the presentation, the everyday activities of re-existence, of existing and resisting, of struggle, and there's anti-colonial struggle, gender struggle, class struggle, those are all entangled within the community. So there's no like particular territorial care by the community, but their everyday practice of inhabiting that territory is caring for that territory, no? And there's a complete consciousness of how and why they inhabit that territory. For example, there's another beautiful example of communal work in Colombia. We have Juntas de Acción Comunal. Those, you can translate that as communal action boards, something like that. And they started in the early 50s, 60s. By now, almost every community has at least one or more. Like, for example, in La Peña, they have 3 Juntas de Acción Comunal. And the first Junta de Acción Comunal started, they joined forces in order to have a better road to La Peña. And then they had 3 Juntas de Acción Comunal, and they joined forces for their I'm trying to think in Spanish or in English, and I'm unable to do it in any. El acueducto, how do you say aqueducto? Well,
An aqueduct.
el acueducto comunal. So they built the communal aqueduct with the joint forces of the 3 Juntas de Acción Comunal. So each member of the community had to work in the construction of the aqueduct. And now it's managed by 3 members of the community. One is in charge of the payments, which are very low, and then 2 others who are fontaneros, and they're like fixing things of the aqueduct. So that's yeah, I think that's another example of how this territorial care springs from everyday communal practices, as the Juntas de Acción Comunal, building an aqueduct. And then it becomes the state clashes violently with communal efforts, because the state promised to build un alcantarillado, which they built like half of it, and now everything is going to all the black waters are going again to El Guajaro, and the state was supposed to build the water treatment plant, which of course they didn't do. So then the question is again if the community should and how they can come together and solve that issue once the state had promised to do it.
Right. And I'm a little bit mindful of time. So we are in the last kind of 5 minutes. It's like time just flew by. So maybe, Andrea, I'll let you respond to my question about care and repair. And then also maybe you can mold that into kind of a final statement. And then I would give the last word also to the Caribe Mutuo team, maybe also, and would give us a little bit of a teaser on, you know, what's to come. So. Yeah.
Yes, so that history that Felipe just told is great because it's also the history of the organization that I work with. It's called ANASADA, Asociación Administradora de Acueductos Comunales, and it's a same movement that started in the 50s, promoted by the state. Juntas in Costa Rica, they're called Asociaciones de Desarrollo, development associations. And so it's a shared history that we have in Colombia and Costa Rica. In many ways are very different, but in many ways are very similar. In fact, people think that when they hear people from Costa Rica speak, they often think, are you from Colombia or from Costa Rica? Because we have a similar accent. When these associations grow, then care also becomes a matter that is mediated through existing legal mechanisms. So one of the things that I recently, last week, heard was how was the association going to start using legal mechanisms to stop deforestation in the higher parts of the cuenca, because those are infiltration areas, and also they're concerned with biodiversity conservation, so on and so forth. So my point here is only to say that there's this care can take an intimate form, and care sometimes draws on repression mechanisms that are set up by the state. And it's part of the contradictions that we deal with and the worlds that we're a part of. And the last thing that I will say, maybe in connection with Alejandro's question, I actually find it really interesting, this moment in terms of where we are from different fields of knowledge, action, thinking, a moment in when a lot of the people that I've met, people that I love to think with in architecture, are moving towards this moment of making and designing that moves away from specific structures. So the way you talk about making, designing, fostering place, rather than designing a process or a building, although of course you have designed a process. And then on the other hand, people like us in anthropology, where we want now to move towards more concrete building of specific things, right? And it struck me in that conversation, that's a really interesting moment for these conversations to be happening, where we're both desiring something that the other had at a different moment. And of course, it's not a binary the way I'm describing it, but in terms of what I see around me about colleagues in anthropology wanting to do very specific, concrete, even material things through their work. So I'll just leave it at that. And thank you for, there's a lot of other things that we could talk about, but hopefully there will be another chance. And thank you to you and Caribe Mutuo, and of course to Laura and Kenny for organizing.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Yeah, I think that's so exciting. How so as social scientists we get enchanted by infrastructure, right, and the material, and then as people working with material, you know get enchanted by the exact opposite. So that's a fascinating observation. I will give the last word to you, Felipe and Luiso, yeah, then before we go, I also want to say a huge thank you to Andrea for making this time, to Kenny to be here as well as the co-convener, and yeah, Felipe, Luiso, what can we do together? What's the next frontier?
It's very difficult. We can practice together. I'll say we can do things together. We based everything on being together and thinking together, cooking together, talking together. This is for me or for us the base of what we can do. Inhabit those problematic and talk about it, doing things together, and embracing this casualness. I love how you were talking about this, Andrea, about how these casualties bring us together within these communities, within this territorial, within this historical moment, within these complex conditions, and how these fluxes of things or this fluidity of things is not making us being afraid, and also because of the responsibility that to become with a design solution is not making us being afraid, but the opposite is giving us the force to always be looking for what we can do together to foster a little bit and accompany a little bit those paths of living together and hopefully finding a way to do something, to live, to have a better co-living together and doing together. I want to thanks very much because our process and our uncertainty processes that we have been with Caribe Mutuo have been very challenging, and all this encountering and all this thinking outside or inside the project or like within. I also want to thank Laura and Kenny for giving these inputs and those questions and those like little remarks and little aids that are very helpful for us. We're always open to put things in this mutual box that you are part in now. Some of what this conversation we have will be in that box, and hopefully it will help this community to find what we want to significant and what we want to talk about it. It's open. It's still listening. We're still on that process. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Luiso. And I think, one of the most powerful statements that I think one can make, and one that I'm always amazed when people actually, are confident enough to make them in public, is to say, I actually don't know yet, and actually, but I'm really, really willing to continue thinking through this and engaging. So I'm really excited that we have further possibilities to engage. And I want to thank everybody for coming today. You are all welcome to tune in again for our final talk of this series next week, Tuesday, with the team from the Developing Alternative Visions of the Great Green Wall. They are working in Sudan. And you are also welcome to revisit this wonderful conversation on our Critical Urbanisms YouTube channel. And with that, thank you, everybody. And I wish you, a wonderful day to Andrea and Felipe and Luiso, and everybody else a wonderful evening or night. All right. Wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Gracias.
Thank you. Gracias.